Hey, thought humiliating the quiet black girl in class would be funny, until her last name turned the whole room silent. At Westbridge Prep, Preston and his spoiled friends laughed, mocked her, opened her private envelope, and treated her like she had no power. Big mistake. Because Zaria Bellamy wasn't just another new student trying to survive a racist classroom. She was the daughter of Dominic Bellamy, a man whispered about like a nightmare in expensive suits. And when he walked through that door, the bullies learned one brutal lesson. Some families don't shout, they erase your protection. Write in the comments where you're watching from. And stay until the end. Because this ending will not disappoint you. The history classroom at Westbridge Prep looked less like a place for teenagers and more like a museum built for rich families to admire themselves. Gold-framed certificates covered the walls. Photos of award-winning students smiled from polished display boards. A giant interactive screen glowed at the front of the room, untouched and expensive, while rows of perfect desks sat under cold white lights. This was not just a classroom. This was where wealthy kids learned, long before adulthood. That power was something they inherited, protected, and used. On Monday morning, just after the first bell rang, Mr. Elias Grant stood near the door with a folder in his hand and cleared his throat. Class, we have a new student joining us today. The door opened, and Zaria Bellamy stepped inside. She wore the Westbridge uniform neatly, but nothing about her was flashy. Her shoes were clean but worn. Her backpack looked older than everyone else's designer bags. Her hair was tied back, simply. Her face calm, her eyes steady. She did not look around nervously. She did not smile too hard. She did not perform gratitude for being there. She simply entered like she had every right to occupy the space. That alone was enough to irritate Preston Vale. Preston sat near the center of the room, exactly where boys like him always sat. Not because the seat was special, but because everyone had silently agreed that attention belonged to him. His orange and white varsity jacket hung open over a white shirt, and his grin had the lazy cruelty of someone who had never been seriously punished. Beside him were Troy Maddox and Kyle Brenner, both loyal in the way. Weak boys become loyal to someone meaner than them. Chelsea Rose sat one row over, already watching Zaria like she was deciding which part of the new girl to attack first. Mr. Grant introduced Zaria politely, explaining that she had transferred into Westbridge Prep mid-semester. Before the teacher could finish, Preston leaned toward Troy and whispered just loud enough for nearby students to hear. Guess the diversity brochure needed a new face. Troy snorted. Kyle covered his mouth, badly pretending not to laugh. Chelsea tilted her head with fake sweetness as Zaria walked toward an empty seat near the window. So, Chelsea said, her voice dripping with poison wrapped in perfume, did you get in on a scholarship? Or was it more of a charity situation? A few students giggled. A few looked down at their desks. Nina Caldwell, sitting in the back, tightened her fingers around her pen but said nothing. She knew what happened when Preston chose someone. Zaria heard everything. Everyone knew she heard it. But she did not flinch. She did not answer Chelsea. She did not reward Preston with embarrassment. She placed her backpack beside her chair, sat down near the window, opened her notebook, and wrote the date at the top of a clean page. That quiet reaction bothered Preston more than anger would have. He was used to tears, trembling voices, defensive excuses, desperate attempts to prove worth. He enjoyed watching people shrink, but Zaria did not shrink. She did not lower her eyes. She did not apologize for existing in a room that had already decided she did not belong. Her silence was not soft. It was controlled. And for a boy like Preston, control in someone else felt like disrespect. Mr. Grant tried to move forward with the lesson, though his eyes flickered toward Preston with the tired caution of a man who had learned the limits of his authority. Today's topic was power, injustice, and the way societies often protect those with status while pretending to value fairness? It was a dangerous subject in a room like that. Mr. Grant wrote the word power on the board and asked, "Who decides who belongs in a system?" Preston slowly raised his hand. "Mr." Grant hesitated before calling on him. Preston leaned back, smiling. "Are we talking about history?" "Mr. Grant," he asked. "Or are we talking about how certain people walk into places they clearly don't belong?" The room went still for half a second. Then scattered laughter broke through. Everyone understood. "Mr." Grant's jaw tightened. "That's enough, Preston." But the warning came out too careful, too measured, too weak. Preston's family had donated the computer lab. Preston's father had paid for the athletic wing. Preston's last suspension had quietly disappeared after a private meeting with the principal. Every adult at Westbridge knew the invisible rules. And Preston knew they knew. That was why he smiled wider. "I'm only asking a question," he said. "You said power decides belonging." "Mr." Grant looked as if he wanted to say more. But the room was watching him, waiting to see whether a teacher's authority could survive a donor's son. It could not. Not fully. Not yet. Then Zaria looked up from her notebook. She did not raise her voice. She did not turn dramatic. She simply looked at Preston with a calmness that made his grin twitch. "Belonging," she said, "is not proven by being the loudest person in the room." Silence hit the class harder than a shout. Nina's eyes lifted. Chelsea's smile froze. Troy glanced at Preston, waiting for permission to laugh. But Preston was not laughing anymore. For one brief second, Preston looked exposed. Not defeated, not scared, but touched in the one place rich bullies hate most: his image. Zaria had not insulted his money, his family, or his popularity. She had done something worse. She had made him look small. Preston's smile returned. But now it carried no humor. It was sharp and private. The kind of smile that promised revenge disguised as entertainment. "Mr." Grant tried to continue the lesson. But the classroom had already shifted. Zaria had become the target, and everyone could feel it. Preston leaned toward Troy again, his voice low but cruelly clear. "Before lunch," he whispered, "the new girl learns how Westbridge works. People without power keep their heads down." Troy grinned. Kyle nodded. Chelsea picked up her phone and tapped the screen as if preparing for a show. Near the back of the room, Nina stopped writing. She had seen this pattern before the joke. The public pressure, the teacher's hesitation, the silence of everyone who wanted to stay safe. But there was something different about Zaria. She sat by the window, calm as glass, as if Preston's threat had not reached her at all. Preston thought she was quiet because she was afraid. He did not know her. Silence came from a different kind of training. Never waste strength on someone who has not yet earned the consequence. And when the first presentation period began, Preston was ready to turn the classroom into a stage for humiliation. What he did not understand was that stages have lights. And lights have a nasty habit of exposing everyone standing under them. "Mr." Grant called Zaria's name during the first presentation round. And the entire classroom seemed to shift before she even stood up. The topic on the board read, "Power and Responsibility in Modern Society." It should have been a simple class assignment. 5 minutes of speaking, a few notes, then applause polite enough to survive until lunch. But at Westbridge Prep, nothing stayed simple. Once Preston Vale decided someone needed to be embarrassed, Zaria walked to the front of the room with her paper in one hand and her notebook in the other. She did not rush. She did not avoid anyone's eyes. She placed her notes on the podium, looked once at Mr. Grant, then began. "Real power," she said, "is not measured by who can speak the loudest. It is measured by who can control consequences." Preston laughed before she finished the sentence. Not a quick laugh, not accidental. A slow, Theatrical laugh meant for the whole room. Then he clapped. Once. Twice. 3 times. Each clap dripping with mockery. Wow, he said, leaning back in his chair. Sounds like somebody watched way too many crime movies over the weekend. A few students laughed because Preston expected them to, Troy Maddox pulled out his phone immediately, grinning like a trained dog waiting for a command. Kyle Brenner followed, pretending to check a message while angling his camera toward the front of the class. Chelsea Rowe lifted her phone, too, smiling with fake excitement. Breaking news, she whispered loudly, as if narrating a live stream. The new girl is teaching us about power, even though she still doesn't know where she's allowed to sit at lunch. More laughter scattered across the room. Zarya paused for half a second. Not because she was shaken, but because she was measuring the room. Some students were enjoying it. Others were uncomfortable but silent. Nina Caldwell sat near the back, her shoulders stiff, her eyes fixed on Zarya with the kind of pity that came from experience. Nina knew exactly what this was. The joke was never just a joke. At Westbridge, humiliation was a ritual, and Preston always made sure his target understood the audience belonged to him. But Zarya did not give him the reaction he wanted. She lowered her eyes to her paper and continued. A society becomes dangerous when people confuse privilege with authority, she said. Especially when those with status are protected from the consequences everyone else would face. That sentence changed Preston's expression. The grin stayed, but something colder entered his eyes. He stood up slowly, as if the classroom had become a stage, and he had finally decided to take the lead role. Mr. Grant straightened. Preston, sit down. Preston ignored him and began walking lazily between the desks, circling the room while Zarya stood at the front. Troy kept filming. Kyle zoomed in. Chelsea whispered, "This is about to be good." Preston stopped near the first row and looked Zarya up and down. "So what? You think you're strong? Because you can read a cute little essay," he asked. "Or did your parents tell you that if you got good grades, the world would magically respect you?" The insult landed harder than the others because it was personal. A few students went quiet. Even Chelsea stopped smiling for a moment, waiting to see if Zarya would finally crack. Zarya placed both hands lightly on the podium and looked straight at Preston. Her voice stayed calm. "I was taught that people who need an audience to feel powerful are usually the weakest ones in the room." The silence that followed was brutal. Nobody laughed this time. Troy's phone was still raised, but even he looked unsure. Preston had built the moment to make Zarya look small, and somehow she had turned it back on him without raising her voice. That was the kind of embarrassment Preston could not forgive. His jaw tightened. He took 2 steps closer to the front of the room and lowered his voice, though not enough to escape the phones recording him. "Listen carefully," he said. "People like you don't talk to me like that here." "Mr." Grant moved quickly now, his face pale with anger and fear. "Preston, sit down. Now." Preston turned his head slowly toward the teacher. "Careful, Mr. Grant," he said with a sweet, Quasnu smile. "My dad just paid for the new media room. Would be awkward if he heard you were creating a hostile environment for students." The threat hung in the air, naked and ugly. "Mr. Grant froze for one painful second. And that second told Zarya everything she needed to know. At Westbridge Prep, even adults measured justice against donation checks. Then Preston reached for Zarya's presentation pages. "Mr. Grant said his name sharply, but Preston had already snatched the papers from the podium. He cleared his throat dramatically and began reading her lines in an exaggerated voice, twisting her words into a joke. "Real power is about consequences." He mocked. "Wow. Deep. Did you write that yourself? Or did you copy it from some motivational poster in a discount store?" Chelsea laughed again, louder this time, desperate to help Preston recover control of the room. Preston flicked the pages into the air. They scattered across the floor like trash. Zarya stepped down from the front to pick them up. And the entire class watched her bend. Preston smiled, then placed his shoe on one of the pages before she could lift it. The room stopped breathing. He looked down at her and said, "Go ahead. Take it." Zarya did not pull. She did not beg. She slowly raised her eyes to his and said, "You are creating evidence against yourself." Preston burst out laughing, relieved to pretend the warning was ridiculous. "Evidence," he said. "Against me, that's adorable. But at the back of the room..." Nina Caldwell's hand had already moved under her textbook. Her phone was no longer on the desk. It was hidden beneath the open pages. Camera facing forward, quietly recording from an angle. Preston never noticed. Her thumb trembled near the screen. But she did not stop. She had stayed silent too many times before. She had watched too many reports disappear. Too many apologies forced out of victims. Too many rich kids walk away smiling. Preston thought his video would turn Zarya into another joke, passed around the school by lunch. What he did not know was that another camera was capturing the version of the truth he would not be able to edit, crop, or laugh away. And before the bell even had a chance to ring, Preston decided mockery was not enough. He was about to cross the final line, not just by insulting Zarya, but by touching something that belonged to her family. After the presentation collapsed into silence, Zarya gathered her pages from the floor with the same calm precision she had carried into the room. She did not rush, did not glare, did not give Preston the satisfaction of seeing her hands shake. Around her, the classroom remained tense. Caught between cruelty and fear, some students pretended to pack their bags. Others watched without blinking. Sensing that Preston was not finished, he never stopped when the room went quiet. Quiet only made him hungrier. Zarya slid the last page back into her folder and reached for her backpack beside the desk near the window. Before she could step away, Preston moved in front of her, blocking the aisle with a lazy smile. Troy Maddox drifted to one side. Kyle Brenner took the other. Chelsea Rowe stood behind them, with her phone still angled towards Zarya's face, hoping for tears. Anger. Anything worth posting. Preston looked down at Zarya as if he were doing her a favor. "New students at Westbridge need a social background check," he said. "You don't just walk in here and start acting equal." A few students laughed nervously. "Mr." Grant's voice cut in from the front. "Preston, move." But the command had no weight now. Preston had already seen the hesitation in his teacher's eyes. And hesitation was all a bully. Needed to know the adults were afraid. Zarya looked at Troy, then Kyle, then Preston. "Move," she said. One word. No begging, no trembling. Just a clean instruction. Preston's smile widened because he mistook control for arrogance. And arrogance was something he believed only people like him were allowed to have. "Relax," he said, reaching down toward her backpack. "I'm helping." His hand grabbed the strap, but instead of lifting it gently, he yanked it hard. The bag tipped sideways and spilled open across the floor. Books slid under desks, pens scattered. A small folded handkerchief landed near Zarya's shoe. Then a black envelope slipped out last, turning once in the air before landing face up on the polished classroom floor. It was thick, elegant, sealed with silver wax. Pressed into the wax was a letter B wrapped inside the shape of a silver raven. The room did not understand it. Not at first, but in the back, Nina Caldwell went pale. She had seen that symbol before in an old local news article. Her father once showed her Bellamy. Not just a family name. A name people in the city lowered their voices around. A name tied to money, investigations, private security, old rumors, and men who did not need to shout to be feared. Preston noticed Nina's reaction, but he did not understand it. Worse, he enjoyed it. He bent down, picked up the envelope, and held it high like a trophy. "Well," Well, he said, what's this? A love letter, a fake invitation to make you look important. Zaria's eyes changed. For the first time that morning, the coldness in her face became visible. Put it down, she said. The class heard the difference immediately. This was not a request. It was not a warning dressed up for drama. It was an order. Preston loved that. He thought he had finally found something that mattered to her. Something private. Something he could ruin. He turned the envelope over, examined the seal, then dug his thumb under the flap. Mr. Grant stepped forward. Do not open that. Preston ripped it anyway. The sound of tearing paper sliced through the room. Zaria did not move. But every student felt the temperature drop. Preston pulled out the letter inside and unfolded it with theatrical slowness. Let's see what our mysterious new girl is hiding. Chelsea leaned over his shoulder. Kyle laughed before reading. Because boys like Kyle laughed first and understood later. Troy zoomed in on Zaria's face. Preston skimmed the first lines, then hesitated. Chelsea snatched a glance and smirked. A private city council hearing, she said. School safety and educational funding. Oh, how fancy, Kyle added. Maybe she's serving drinks there. Chelsea giggled. Dominic Bellamy Foundation. She read aloud, making the name sound like a costume. Are you pretending to be rich with charity paperwork now? But Nina was no longer smiling. And Mr. Grant's face had gone gray. He had recognized the heading. This was not some gala invitation. It was tied to a closed hearing on private schools, accused of burying bullying reports through donor money. Westbridge Prep was already under quiet review. And Preston Vale, son of the school's biggest donor, and had just opened confidential material in front of an entire classroom while being recorded by his own friends. Zaria stepped closer to Preston. You don't understand what you just opened. Preston leaned in, still desperate to look in control. Then explain it, he whispered loudly. Or do you need to call Daddy to save you? The class laughed. But the laughter died piece by piece when Zaria looked directly into his eyes. No, she said. You're the one who's going to need your father. That landed differently. Preston's smile twitched. For a second, doubt moved across his face, but pride strangled it immediately. He shoved the letter back toward her chest, then placed a hand on her shoulder, as if marking ownership of the moment. Nobody here is scared of you, he said. Not me. Not this class. Not this school. Zaria did not push his hand away. She simply looked down at it, then back at him. That was your third mistake. Mister! Grant stared at the torn envelope, fully understanding now that this had moved far beyond classroom cruelty. Nina's hidden phone was still recording from the back, capturing Preston's hand on Zaria. The torn seal, the opened letter, the witnesses, the arrogance. Preston thought he was humiliating a new girl with no power. In reality, he had just pulled open the door to the darkest secret Westbridge Prep had spent months trying to keep buried. And before he could laugh again, the classroom door swung open. A man in a black suit stepped inside, and the entire room went cold. The classroom door swung open before Preston could laugh again. And the sound cut through the room like a verdict. Every head turned. The hallway behind the door was strangely silent, as if the entire school had paused outside that one room. A tall black man stepped inside, wearing a perfectly fitted black suit, a wine-colored tie, and an expression so calm it was almost more frightening than anger. He did not storm in. He did not shout. He did not even look rushed. Behind him stood a middle-aged assistant holding a dark leather briefcase. And beside them, a school security officer looked painfully uncomfortable, like he had escorted in someone he knew. He had no authority to stop. The man's shoes touched the classroom floor with quiet certainty. No one spoke, even Preston Vale, who had spent the entire morning performing for an audience, froze for half a second. He did not know the man's name yet, but something in his body recognized a different kind of power. This was not a nervous parent. This was not someone who had come begging for fairness. This was someone who expected the room to understand consequences before he said a word. Dominic Bellamy did not look at Preston first. That was what made it worse. He walked past him as if Preston were a piece of furniture, placed badly in the aisle. His eyes went straight to Zaria. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice low, steady, and controlled. Zaria stood near her desk. Her torn presentation pages scattered around her feet. The black envelope ripped open in Preston's hand. She did not cry. She did not run to him. She only nodded once. "I'm fine," she said. Then her eyes moved to the letter, but he opened the envelope. Dominic's gaze lowered to the paper Preston was holding. The air in the classroom became heavy. Mr. Grant swallowed hard. Nina's fingers tightened around the phone hidden beneath her textbook. Troy slowly lowered his camera. Chelsea stopped smiling completely. Preston looked down at the letter, then back at Dominic, suddenly realizing that whatever he had touched was not just private. It was important. Preston forced himself to smirk. Because boys like him believed confidence could replace intelligence if they wore it loudly enough. "Who are you?" he asked. Parents aren't allowed to just walk into class. Dominic still did not answer him. Instead, he bent down, picked up Zaria's fallen presentation pages one by one, straightened them against the edge of her desk, and placed them neatly beside her notebook. It was a small action, almost gentle, but to Preston, it felt like an insult sharper than any threat. Dominic was not treating him like an enemy. He was treating him like noise. Like a temporary inconvenience in a room where something more serious was happening. Only after the last page was placed down did Dominic turn toward him. Before he could speak, Troy leaned close to Preston and whispered, "Bellamy. I think I've heard that name." Chelsea was already typing into her phone. Her face changed as the search results appeared. Articles filled her screen. Dominic Bellamy, powerful businessman, founder of a child protection foundation, private security investor, real estate figure, former subject of federal investigations that never led to conviction, and the man whispered about in the city as someone with old mafia ties no one could ever prove. Chelsea shoved the phone toward Preston with shaking fingers. Preston glanced at it, and for the first time all morning, his smile disappeared. Only for a second. Then pride dragged it back onto his face. So what he said, though his voice had lost some of its sharpness, "Your daughter still doesn't get to act like she owns this place." Dominic looked at him fully now. No Gladys. No rage. Just a stare. So still it made the room feel smaller. "My daughter," he said, "does not need to own a place to be respected inside it." Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Preston's cheeks flushed, but he had no clever reply ready. Dominic's assistant stepped forward and quietly opened the briefcase. That tiny movement made Principal Crane's absence suddenly feel dangerous. "Mr. Grant looked between Dominic and the torn envelope, as if the pieces were finally connecting. Then Dominic said the sentence that changed the entire room. "For clarity, I was not called here by my daughter." Preston's eyes narrowed. Dominic continued, "I already had an appointment at Westbridge Prep today with members of the school board regarding bullying complaints, altered disciplinary records, and donor interference." Mr. Grant went still. Nina's breath caught. Preston's fingers tightened around the letter. The timing was not bad luck anymore. It was a trap he had stepped into by being exactly as arrogant as everyone expected. Dominic looked toward the security officer. "This classroom is now part of an active review. I want the room preserved. The names of every student present recorded, and the camera footage pulled immediately." The security officer stammered, I'll need approval from Principal Crane." Dominic's expression did not change. "Then call her." Preston had thought power meant making people afraid in front of an audience. Dominic Bellamy had just walked into the same audience and proved real power did not need volume. It needed timing, evidence, and a silence strong enough to crush every lie in the room. And when Principal Meredith Crane came rushing down the hallway minutes later, she was not coming to protect Zaria. She was coming to bury the incident before it destroyed Westbridge Prep. Principal Meredith Crane arrived at the history classroom with the kind of polished smile adults used when they were already calculating damage. Her heels clicked once on the floor, then stopped. She saw Dominic Bellamy standing near Zaria's desk. She saw the torn black envelope, the opened letter, Preston's pale but defiant face, the phones in several students' hands, and Mr. Grant looking like a man who had just watched a match fall into gasoline. For one brief second, panic flashed behind her eyes. Then the professional mask came down. "Everyone needs to calm down," she said. Her voice smooth, but too quick. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. And we do not need to turn a classroom disagreement into something larger than it is." Zaria turned toward her slowly. "Which part was the misunderstanding?" she asked. "When he insulted me, when he took my papers, when he opened my private envelope, or when he put his hand on me?" The question landed with surgical precision. Crane opened her mouth, but no answer came out fast enough. Preston saw the hesitation and rushed in like he had been trained for this exact moment. "She provoked me," he said. "She kept threatening me with evidence. She came in here acting like everyone owed her respect." Chelsea immediately nodded. "She was hostile from the beginning," she added, wrapping the lie in fake concern. Troy lifted his phone slightly and said, "We only recorded because we were worried she'd twist the story." Kyle mumbled agreement, too nervous to sound convincing but loyal enough to follow the script. The speed of it was disgusting. They did not even need to look at one another. They had done this before. One person struck the match. The others built the smoke. And Principal Crane called the fire a misunderstanding. Dominic watched them without interrupting. That made the room more uncomfortable than if he had shouted. He waited until every lie had placed itself on the table, then looked at Crane. "Pull the classroom camera footage." The principal's smile tightened. "Unfortunately, the camera in this room has been under maintenance since this morning." "Mr. Grant's head snapped up. "Maintenance?" he asked. "I wasn't notified." The security officer shifted uneasily near the door. "I don't remember this room being on today's maintenance list," he said before realizing he had spoken too honestly. Crane shot him a sharp look. The room changed again. Zaria stood very still. Preston's confidence flickered back for half a second, because a broken camera sounded like salvation. But Dominic did not react the way he expected. He did not accuse. He did not raise his voice. He simply asked, "How many times has a Westbridge camera stopped working?" When Preston Vale was named in a complaint, Principal Crane's face lost color. Preston looked at her. Chelsea looked at Preston. "Mr. Grant looked down as if the question had opened a file in his memory he had been trying not to touch. At the back of the room, Nina Caldwell felt her heartbeat climb into her throat. Her phone was still hidden beneath her open textbook. Still recording. She had caught everything. The torn envelope. The accusation. The camera excuse. The question that made Crane's mask crack. She knew this was the moment. She also knew what Preston did to people who exposed him. Her thumb moved toward the screen. Not to stop the recording, but to check whether it was still saving. Chelsea saw the glow under the book. Her eyes widened. "She's recording," she shouted. The classroom exploded. Preston lunged toward Nina so quickly her chair scraped backward. Zaria moved first. Stepping between him and the back row, Preston shoved past the disc, knocking a water bottle to the floor. "Mr. Grant shouted. "Preston, stop." The security officer took one step forward, then froze the old Westbridge instinct. The donor's son still wearing invisible protection. Dominic raised one hand. "Do not touch him," he said. His voice cut through the chaos. Everyone froze except Preston, who had already grabbed Nina's phone from under the textbook. Dominic's eyes stayed on him. "Let him finish building his own file." The sentence was quiet, but it hit like a knife pressed against glass. Preston stared back, breathing hard, trying to pretend he had not just made everything worse in front of witnesses. He looked down at the phone, swiped frantically, searching for the video. "You can't record me," he snapped. Delete. Nina stood shaking behind Zarya, her eyes wet but her voice suddenly loud enough for the whole room. It already backed up automatically. Silence dropped so hard it felt physical. Preston's thumb stopped moving. Chelsea's face went white. Troy lowered his phone completely. Principal Crane closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. Because she understood before anyone else did, the lie had escaped the building. Dominic stepped closer. Not to threaten, but to collect the moment. "The school camera may be broken," he said. But apparently the truth is not. Nobody answered. Preston still held Nina's phone, but it had become useless in his hand. A stolen object that only proved he had tried to erase evidence. Crane quickly ordered everyone out of the classroom and toward the principal's office, claiming the matter needed to be handled privately. But privacy was exactly what had protected Preston for years. And this time, the door was closing too late. As they moved into the hallway, students whispered, phones buzzed, and Nina walked behind Zarya with trembling hands but a lifted chin. The school could call its cameras broken. It could call cruelty a misunderstanding. But the truth had been saved before money had the chance to delete it. And as Principal Crane forced them toward her office, every step she took to contain the incident dragged another old Westbridge secret closer to the light. Principal Meredith Crane's office was designed to impress donors before it ever comforted students. The carpet was thick. The bookshelves were polished. And the glass cabinets displayed trophies under perfect lighting. On the wall behind her desk, framed photographs showed Crane shaking hands with wealthy parents, board members, city officials, and in the largest photo near the center, Victor Vale himself. Preston's father stood beside her in that picture, smiling like a man who knew his money had already purchased more than a plaque on a wall. Crane guided everyone inside with force control, as if moving the problem from a classroom into her office could magically reduce the damage. "No one is to post anything," she said before anyone had even sat down. "No one is to discuss this in the hallway, in group chat, or anywhere else. Westbridge Prep has a reputation, and reckless rumors can harm this institution." Zarya sat beside Dominic without changing expression. Nina sat near Mr. Repri. Grant, clutching her phone with both hands like it was the only thing keeping the truth alive. Preston dropped into the chair across from them, trying to look bored, but his fingers kept tapping against the armrest, fast and uneven. Crane folded her hands on the desk and continued in that soft, administrative voice that made lies sound clean. "This will be handled internally. There is no need for outside involvement. No need for board escalation, and certainly no need for emotional accusations." Zarya looked at her for a long second. She noticed Crane still had not asked whether she was hurt. Not once. The principal had asked for silence before she asked for truth. Dominic noticed too. He placed his black briefcase on the desk with a quiet click that made Crane's eyes flicker. "You said internally," he said. "Then show me Preston Vale's internal disciplinary record for the last 2 years." Crane's smile vanished by half an inch. "Student records are confidential." "Mr. Bellamy." Dominic nodded once. Almost politely, "Repeated misconduct becomes relevant when it connects to an incident involving my daughter." Crane leaned back. "That is not how school procedure works." Preston laughed under his breath, gaining a little courage. "You don't have the right to demand anything here." Dominic turned his head toward Preston slowly. "You're mistaken," he said. "I am not asking as an angry father. I am asking as a representative of the foundation currently reviewing Westbridge Prep student safety policies, disciplinary practices, and donor influence." The office went still. Even the security officer by the door looked away, as if he had just heard something he was not supposed to know. Crane's face tightened. That review is preliminary, she said. Dominic opened the briefcase. Not anymore. He removed a folder and placed it on the desk. No theatrics. No shouting. Just paper, which somehow looked more dangerous in his hands than any threat Preston could have imagined. For months, Dominic said, my foundation has received anonymous complaints from Westbridge students. Reports of bullying. Reports disappearing. Witnesses intimidated. Parents told their children were exaggerating. Teachers advised to soften language. Preston's tapping stopped. Zarya stayed silent, but she looked at Nina. The girl's lips trembled, and then the tears came. I sent one. Nina whispered. Crane's eyes snapped toward her. Nina swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. Preston locked me in the props room after rehearsal because I wouldn't write his essay. I reported it. Nothing happened. The file disappeared. Preston jerked forward. That's a lie. Nina shook her head, crying harder now, but no longer hiding. You told me if I talked again, everyone would think I was crazy. Crane lifted a hand. Nina. That situation was reviewed as a misunderstanding. Mr. Grant stood so abruptly his chair scraped the floor. No, it wasn't. Everyone turned. His face was pale, but his voice had finally found weight. I filed 3 reports about Preston Vale. 3. Each one came back from this office with notes asking me to adjust my wording. Avoid labeling. Consider student future. Do not create unnecessary liability. Those were your words. Crane's mask cracked. Mr. Grant, this is not the time. It has been the time for 2 years. He cut in. Preston exploded. You're all making this up because she embarrassed me in class. He pointed at Zarya. But his voice had lost its old control. She came here to start something. Crane slammed her hand lightly on the desk. Enough. This meeting is becoming inappropriate. Dominic opened the folder and slid several printed emails across the desk. Then let's make it appropriate. Crane looked down. Her face drained. The emails were real. Internal message. Edited reports. Warnings softened before they became official records. Complaints redirected before they reached the board. Mr. Grant stared at the pages like a man seeing proof of what he had lived through. Nina covered her mouth. Preston stared at Crane, finally understanding she might not be able to save him this time. Dominic closed the briefcase again. Your problem, Principal Crane, is that you thought silence meant there was no evidence. His voice remained low, but the office seemed to shrink around it. Preston had entered believing he only needed to survive a parent meeting. What he did not know was that Dominic Bellamy had walked into that office carrying an investigation already loaded and aimed directly at Westbridge Prep. And when the door opened again, Victor Vale arrived with his private attorney at his side, turning the confrontation from a student scandal into a war between 2 empires of power. Victor Vale entered Principal Crane's office like a man walking into a building he had already paid for. He did not knock with respect. He pushed the door open, stepped inside with his private attorney beside him, and immediately filled the room with the arrogance of someone used to being welcomed before being questioned. His suit was expensive, his watch even louder than his voice. And his eyes went first to Preston, not with concern, but with irritation. He did not ask what happened. He did not ask whether Zarya was hurt. He did not apologize to the girl sitting across from his son with torn papers, a violated envelope, and a room full of witnesses behind her. Instead, Victor looked at Principal Crane and said, I want to know who is trying to destroy my son's reputation. The sentence landed exactly the way Preston needed it to. Not, what did you do? Not tell me the truth. Just reputation. Image. Damage control. The family language of people who never learned the difference between accountability and inconvenience. Preston straightened in his chair, feeding off his father's arrival like a spoiled prince watching the army ride in. Principal Crane stood quickly, almost too quickly, and guided everyone into the small conference room attached to her office, claiming they needed a more appropriate space. The room had a long table, frosted windows, and a framed donor plaque on the wall, with the Vale family name engraved near the top. Victor's attorney opened a leather folder before anyone else spoke. "We understand there is a student recording issue," he said. His eyes moved straight to Nina. "Any video taken of a minor in a classroom without consent may constitute a privacy violation. We request that the device be turned over immediately and that the footage be removed from all school discussions." Nina's grip tightened around her phone. Her face turned pale. Principal Crane seized the argument instantly. "That is exactly why we must be careful," she said. "Westbridge cannot discipline a student based on unauthorized footage." Dominic Bellamy did not move for several seconds. Then he looked at the attorney, then at Victor, then at Preston. "So the video Nina recorded to document harassment is a violation," he said calmly. "But the video Preston recorded to humiliate my daughter is acceptable." The conference room went silent. The attorney blinked once, his prepared rhythm broken. Victor slowly turned toward Preston. And for the first time since entering, annoyance sharpened into suspicion. Preston's jaw tightened. "I only recorded because she was acting aggressive," he said quickly. "She kept threatening me, talking about evidence, acting like she was above everyone." Zarya sat still, watching him build another lie with the confidence of someone who had never paid full price for one. Chelsea and Troy were called in from the hallway to support Preston's version. Chelsea entered first, arms crossed, trying to look offended instead of nervous. She claimed Zarya had come in with an attitude and had raised her voice before Preston reacted. Troy, less polished, said Zarya had barely spoken but had looked threatening. The contradiction sat in the middle of the table like a dead animal. Then Kyle, brought in after them, tried to help and ruined it. Preston was just joking, like he always does. He muttered. Dominic's eyes shifted toward him immediately, like he always does. Dominic repeated softly. He wrote the phrase down. Kyle's face drained when he realized he had not defended Preston. He had confirmed a pattern. Victor saw the room slipping, so he changed weapons. He leaned back, looked directly at Dominic, and smiled with practiced cruelty. "Interesting," he said. "We are being lectured on student safety by Dominic Bellamy. Should we discuss your past?" "Mr. Bellamy, the investigations, the rumors, the men who supposedly learned not to cross Ukraine, looked down but did not stop him." The attorney did not interrupt. Victor continued. "A man with your history has no right to walk into this school and pretend to be the moral authority. Maybe the real issue is that your daughter brought intimidation into this building before my son ever said a word." For the first time, Zarya stood. The movement was quiet, but every eye went to her. She looked at Victor, not with fear, but with disappointment sharp enough to cut. "You are doing exactly what your son did," she said. "When you cannot disprove the truth, you attack the person telling it." Mr. Grant's expression changed. Nina looked up at Zarya like she had just said the thing every victim in Westbridge had been too scared to say. Victor's smile faded. Dominic did not rush to defend himself. He did not pretend his past was simple. "I am not here to be liked," he said. "I am not here to win a popularity contest with people who confuse donations with virtue. I am here because students in this school deserve to be safe." Then he opened his folder again and placed a list on the table. 11 complaints. 11 names partially redacted. 11 incidents connected to Preston Vale. Troy Maddox, Kyle Brenner, and Chelsea Rowe. Locker room threats, cafeteria humiliation, intimidated witnesses, missing reports, altered language. Victor's face changed for one exposed second, not because he was shocked his son had done those things, but because he was shocked Dominic had the list. Dominic looked across the table at him. "You came here with a lawyer to crush a new girl before lunch," he said. "But you should have asked what else was already on the record." Victor's confidence did not disappear, but it cracked. Preston stared at the paper as if seeing his own name become heavier than his father's money could lift. He had expected protection. Instead, the room had turned into a mirror. Victor Vale had arrived to bury Zaria under wealth, legal threats, and old rumors about her father. But now he understood the mistake. Dominic Bellamy was not playing defense. He had come to flip the entire board, and while the adults argued over control, Nina made a decision under the table. Her thumb moved across her screen, and the video left the conference room. From that moment on, Westbridge Prep could no longer bury the truth behind a closed door. While the adults argued inside the conference room, Nina Caldwell made the first brave decision of her life without asking permission from anyone. Her hands were still shaking beneath the table, but her thumb moved with purpose. She sent the video to one trusted friend, then uploaded it to 2 backup accounts, then forwarded the file again with one simple message: do not let them delete this. At first, only a few students saw it. A handful in the hallway, a small group in the cafeteria, then someone dropped it into the junior class chat, then the senior chat, then the private group where students usually shared gossip, jokes, and cafeteria complaints. Within minutes, the video was no longer just a recording on Nina's phone. It was everywhere. By lunchtime, Westbridge Prep knew exactly what Preston Vale had done. The video was ugly because it was clear there was no dramatic editing, no music, no caption, no rumors. Just Preston laughing as Zaria stood at the front of the history classroom. Preston interrupting her presentation. Preston mocking her voice. Preston taking her papers and throwing them on the floor. Preston stepping on one of the pages, like her work was trash. Then the black envelope appeared. The clip showed him opening it, even after Zaria told him to put it down. It showed his hand on her shoulder. It showed him lunging toward Nina when Chelsea screamed that she was recording. And worst of all, for Principal Crane, the video captured her, calling the whole thing a misunderstanding before asking about the school's reputation. That one line spread faster than everything else. Students played it back in the cafeteria, in bathrooms, under desks, behind lockers. A misunderstanding. That was what Westbridge called humiliation when the bully's last name was attached to a donor plaque. Students began gathering outside the principal's office, first in small clusters, then in a crowd thick enough to block the hallway. The atmosphere changed with every replay. Fear started turning into anger. Anger started turning into names. Malik, a quiet sophomore who usually ate lunch alone, stepped forward and told 3 students near the vending machines that Preston once dumped a tray of food on him in the cafeteria and made him apologize for standing in the splash zone. Harper, a girl from the drama club, admitted Chelsea had filmed her crying in the bathroom after a rehearsal and sent it around with laughing emojis. Another student said Kyle had forced him to complete a test review packet and threatened to spread fake rumors if he refused. For the first time, these stories were not whispered like shame. They were spoken like evidence. Principal Crane stormed into the hallway and ordered everyone to return to class. "This is not a public matter," she snapped, her polished voice finally cracking. But nobody moved quickly. Nobody looked as scared as they had before. "Mister." Grant stepped out behind her, saw the crowd, and realized the silence had broken. A student asked him if reports had really been ignored. "Mister." Grant hesitated only once, then said, "Some incidents were reported and not handled properly." That was enough. The hallway erupted with voices. Dates, location, names, the locker room, the cafeteria, the south stairwell, the auditorium, the props room. The same pattern repeated again and again. Preston or his friends did something cruel. Someone complained, and the school softened it, buried it, or blamed the victim for making trouble. Inside the office, Victor Vale realized the situation was escaping the room. His face flushed red as he turned to Crane. "Shut down the Wi-Fi," he demanded. "Now." Crane looked startled but reached for her phone. The problem was that 3 students near the office door were already recording him through the glass panel. The moment Victor's order left his mouth, it became another clip. Within seconds, students were sharing that too. Preston's father trying to cut the school network to stop the video from spreading. Dominic watched it happen with the calm of a man watching arrogance, write its own confession. "You just proved the issue is not only what your son did," he said, "it is that this entire system knows how to hide it." That sentence hit Victor harder than any insult. Preston, trapped between the growing noise outside and the evidence inside, finally lost control. He shoved past his father and stormed into the hallway. "Nina," he shouted. The crowd turned. Nina froze. But Zarya moved with her, stepping directly in front of her before Preston could get close. "You traitor." Preston spat, his voice raw with panic. "You ruined my life." Nina's eyes filled with tears, but she did not step back. Zarya's voice cut through the hallway, cold and steady. "No. She stopped letting you ruin hers." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the whispers began again. But they were different now. Not afraid, hungry for truth. Preston looked around and saw something he had never seen at Westbridge before, people looking at him without fear. A video that was supposed to capture a few minutes in a classroom had become a fire burning through years of silence. And when the school board called an emergency meeting that afternoon, Victor Vale reached for the dirtiest card he had left, turning Dominic Bellamy's past into a weapon to save his son. The emergency board meeting at Westbridge Prep began with the kind of formal silence that made every lie sound more expensive. The long conference table gleamed under the ceiling lights. Board members sat with folders open in front of them. A few parents had been allowed inside. Lawyers occupied the corners like shadows with briefcases. Principal Meredith Crane sat near the head of the table, her face tight, her hands folded so perfectly they looked staged. Preston sat beside Victor Vale, trying to look wronged instead of exposed. Zarya sat across from him with Dominic Bellamy at her side. Nina was there too, pale but steady, with Mr. Grant seated close enough to remind her she was no longer alone. The board chair asked for a summary, and Crane immediately reached for the safest version of the truth. She read from a prepared statement, calling the incident a personal conflict between 2 students that escalated due to emotional misunderstanding. "Mr. Grant stood before she could finish. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. "No," he said. "This was not a personal conflict. This was targeted harassment, intimidation, and part of a pattern this school has refused to address." The room shifted. Crane's lips pressed into a thin line. Victor Vale leaned back, watching Mr. Grant like a man memorizing the name of someone he planned to punish later. "That is a serious accusation." One board member said, "Mr. Grant nodded. "It is, and it should have been treated seriously the first 3 times I reported Preston Vale." A murmur moved through the room. Preston looked away. Crane tried to interrupt, but the board chair raised a hand. For the first time that day, she was not fully in control. Victor recognized the danger immediately and stood. His voice was polished, powerful, and ugly beneath the surface. "Before this board allows itself to be manipulated by emotional performances," he said, "I suggest we consider the environment Miss Bellamy comes from." His eyes moved to Dominic. "We all know the articles, the investigations, the rumors surrounding Dominic Bellamy, men who challenged him in business and somehow disappeared from the market, federal questions that never quite became charges. Old connections no respectable school should ignore." Whispers began around the table. That was exactly what Victor wanted. If he could not erase the video, he would poison the people watching it. Principal Crane saw the opening and took it. "The school must also consider whether outside influence has created a threatening atmosphere for our students," she said, suddenly sounding concerned about safety for the first time all day. Preston's shoulders lifted slightly, confidence returning in small, rotten pieces. Zarya looked at her father. Dominic did not look angry. That made him more dangerous. He stood slowly, buttoned his suit jacket, and faced the room. I have lived long enough to know that people bring up your past when they cannot survive their present. He said, the whispers died. Yes. I grew up around violence, power, silence. I know what happens when people with influence decide rules are only for the weak. That is exactly why I spent the second half of my life building a foundation to protect children from systems like this one. Nobody moved. Dominic's voice stayed level, but every word tightened around the room. A system where money buys silence, where victims are told to apologize for bleeding on the carpet, where cameras fail at convenient moments, where a boy with the right last name can terrorize classmates and still be described as promising. Victor's jaw flexed. Crane's face drained of color. Then Dominic opened the final folder. He did not slam it down. He placed it carefully in front of the board chair. These are financial records, internal emails, and complaint timelines. Donations from Victor Vale's affiliated accounts were transferred into discretionary school funds within days of multiple complaints against Preston being downgraded, delayed, or removed from formal review. The room erupted. Board members reached for the documents. Parents whispered louder. Crane stood halfway from her chair. This is outrageous. You are trying to destroy this school. Zarya finally spoke, her voice calm enough to cut through the noise. No, truth only destroys what was already rotten. Victor slammed his palm on the table. Those records were stolen. Dominic looked at him. No. They were sent by people inside this school who were tired of being forced to stay silent. That sentence changed everything. The monster Victor tried to paint was no longer outside the gates. It was sitting inside the room, wearing donor smiles, administrative titles, and legal threats. Preston stared at the folder as if paper had become a weapon. Crane looked at the board and saw faces that no longer trusted her. Victor had tried to turn Dominic Bellamy into the villain. But in a minute, Dominic had shown everyone where the real danger lived. Now the board was no longer asking what Zarya had done wrong. They were asking why Westbridge had allowed Preston to be wrong for so long without anyone stopping him. The boardroom no longer felt like a place for polite discussion. It felt like a courtroom without a judge's robe. After Dominic placed the financial records and internal emails on the table, the board members stopped looking at Preston like a misunderstood student and started looking at him like the center of a much larger scandal. One of the board members leaned toward the chair and whispered something. Another picked up the complaint timeline and compared the dates to the donation records. The room was full of paper, but somehow every page sounded louder than Preston's excuses. Finally, the board chair looked up and said, Preston Vale will leave the room while we begin an emergency disciplinary review. Preston's face went blank. For the first time all day, no adult immediately moved to protect him. He looked at his father, waiting for Victor to stop it, to bark a threat, to buy him one more escape. Victor stood halfway from his chair. Absolutely not. My son is not being treated like a criminal because of rumors and emotional testimony. His lawyer leaned close and muttered something into his ear. The financial records had changed the temperature. This was no longer only about a classroom incident. This was about possible donor interference, altered discipline reports, and administrative misconduct. Victor's mouth tightened, but he sat back down. Preston rose slowly. The arrogance that had carried him through the morning was gone. Peeled off piece by piece until only panic remained underneath. He passed Zarya on his way to the door, but she did not look away. She did not smile either. That was what made it worse. She did not need to celebrate his fall. She only needed to witness it. The board chair then turned to Principal Crane. Pending investigation. You are relieved of active administrative duties, effective immediately. Crane stared as if the sentence had been spoken in another language. You cannot do that, she said, but her voice no longer had command in it. The chair continued, listing the materials to be turned over, edited disciplinary reports. maintenance logs for the so-called broken cameras, communication with the Vale family, and all records connected to bullying complaints. An independent auditor would review the funding transfers. Mr. Grant would submit every original report he had filed. Nina and the other students who came forward would be protected from retaliation. The room that had been built to bury problems had finally become the room where one was dug up in full daylight. Preston's friends did not escape either. Troy, Kyle, and Chelsea were named in the review for harassment, recording students for humiliation, intimidation of witnesses, and participation in false statements. Nobody laughed. Nobody whispered. Just a joke. Nobody called Zaria dramatic. Outside the meeting room, students lined the hallway, pretending not to wait while waiting for everything. When Preston stepped out, the crowd went silent. That silence was different from the silence he used to create. It did not belong to fear. It belonged to judgment. Victor followed minutes later, his face red with rage and humiliation. He stopped near Dominic, hatred burning in his eyes. But for once, he had no clean threat left. Dominic looked at him and said quietly, "You taught your son that money could open every door. Today he learned some doors open straight into hell." Victor said nothing. He only walked away, and the sound of his expensive shoes down the hallway felt smaller with every step. Zaria walked out with Nina beside her. Students stepped aside, not because they feared her, but because they finally understood what strength looked like when it did not need to scream. Nina wiped her eyes and whispered, "I should have been brave sooner." Zaria stopped and turned to her. "Courage is not the absence of fear," she said. "Courage is being afraid and still refusing to let the wrong person write the story." Nina nodded, and for the first time, she looked less like a witness and more like someone who had taken her own voice back. A few days later, Zaria returned to the same history classroom. Preston's seat was empty. The spot where he had stood mocking her now looked ordinary, almost pathetic. "Mr. Grant began the lesson by writing one question on the board. What does power mean without responsibility?" No one joked. No one looked away. The silence in the room was no longer cowardice. It was awareness. Outside the window, Dominic Bellamy stood near the courtyard for a moment. He did not enter the classroom. He did not need to. He simply looked at Zaria, gave a small nod, and walked away. Westbridge Prep was forced to change anonymous reporting, independent camera oversight, public disciplinary procedures, and anti-bullying protections that could no longer be quietly erased by donor checks. Preston lost the thing he valued most. Not popularity, not status, not even his spotless record. He lost the power to make people afraid of him. Without his father's money covering the damage, he was just a bully. Everyone had finally seen clearly. Zaria had entered Westbridge as the new girl they thought they could humiliate. By the end of that day, she had made an entire system tremble. And the lesson left behind was cold and unforgettable. Never mistake silence for weakness. Because some families do not need to shout to make a room bow before the truth. And that is how one quiet girl walked into Westbridge Prep as a target. But left in, what? As the reason an entire corrupt system started shaking. Zaria never needed to scream, beg, or prove her worth to people who were trained to disrespect anyone without money behind their name. Preston thought humiliation was power. Principal Crane thought silence could protect reputation. And Victor Vale thought his money could bury the truth forever. But Dominic Bellamy showed them that real power does not always come loud. Sometimes it arrives in a black suit, opens one folder, and destroys every lie in the room. What would you have done if you were in Zaria's place that day? If this story moved you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more powerful stories where justice finally speaks louder than cruelty.